Joining me live now is the Shadow Treasurer, Angus Taylor. Thanks for your time. Are you at least giving a tick to the government for the restraint they've shown in terms of banking 99% of the surging tax revenue we've seen over the last financial year?
Well, Kieran, the test for the government with this budget was to have a clear and comprehensive plan that built from the strength of the budget and economy we had, much stronger than almost any other country in the world, and then deal with the challenges Australia is facing around cost of living in particular. Part of that is having a responsible budget, but in fact what we saw in the budget was an extra $140 billion, more than $140 billion of additional taxation, the majority of which was then spent. So it was very clear that they weren't actually banking anything like 99%. In fact, the vast majority of that extra tax revenue was being spent by the new Labor government. Worse than that, it was breaking a whole series of promises. A promise to deliver lower electricity prices, $275. Instead, what we got was a 50% increase. A promise to deliver improvement in real wages, and yet instead what we got in this election cycle is real wages going back.
Should there have been direct power price relief, in your view?
Well, what Labor should do is meet its election commitment. I mean, it's as simple as that. When you make an election commitment, it's only a few months ago, Australians rightly should expect and can expect you to keep that commitment.
There has been the war in Ukraine, though, and various other impacts.
The war in the Ukraine was before the election, Kieran. It started before the election. Labor made that commitment. They had it right up until election day. And, of course, they've now laid out in black and white that they're going to breach it, just like the real wages, just like addressing cost of living pressures. Tony Burke said that you would see the impact of the change of government in your bank account, referring to cost of living pressures. The truth is you are going to see the impact. A typical family by Christmas will be $2,000 worse off since the election as a result of the assumptions in this budget.
So would you like to see that direct support, though?
Well, I'm just disappointed to read a document that's full of doom and gloom, that doesn't build from the extraordinary strength Australia has had relative to almost any other country in the world, and then doesn't deal with the underlying challenges Australia's got, whilst also failing to meet election commitments that were ironclad. I mean, these were election commitments that you'll remember Labor made very, very clear, very, very clear. There was no ambiguity about them. They're not delivering on them. Indeed, they're walking away from them. And what we see in this budget is 4 years of extra taxation, extra spending, deficits getting worse, not better, and a failure to really address the challenges.
Do you accept, though, the inflationary environment that we are in at the moment does make it more difficult to hand money out in terms of relief?
Well, there's a lot of ways to relieve cost of living pressures. I mean, electricity prices, they said they had a plan to relieve cost of living pressures, and it wasn't handing out direct relief, but clearly they don't think that's going to work anymore. They've given up on it. I mean, they're walking away. So what's most disappointing about this budget is it's just not meeting the commitments that Labor promised they were going to deliver. And worse than that, it's not delivering on the challenges that Australians are facing. We are in an extremely strong position. I mean, the economy was running at 3.9% last year, 3.5% unemployment. We've got an improving budget situation, extra $50 billion. We've seen in the tax revenues in the budget, of course, as I said, over $140 billion of extra tax revenues. Where is this all going? None of these challenges are being addressed that Australians are feeling right now.
On the energy prices, Jim Chalmers says the government's considering a broader sweep of regulatory intervention than it otherwise would, given the forecasts we see in this budget. 20% increase in power prices this year, 30% next year. Obviously, huge power price increases. He's saying they're looking at a broader sweep of intervention by government. Do you welcome that?
Well, I haven't seen what he's proposing. I mean, you can talk in theoretical terms, Kieran, but this is difficult policy. I understand it reasonably well. I was the energy minister. We got electricity prices down by 8% in recent years for a typical household.
Should they be looking at a cap? Should they be looking at a cap on prices?
You know, at the end of the day, you've got to get balance right in the energy system, and I see no sign of that happening. But they're the ones that made this commitment. They've got to keep it. And I think Australians have every right to be disappointed that what this budget fails to do is address the challenges they're facing. And the challenges that Labor promised at the election they were going to meet, they are not doing it.
You've argued in the lead up to the budget that growth in spending should be less than economic growth. Jim Chalmers says they've met that with real spending growth across the forward estimates at 0.3% or flat. Do you accept that?
Well, he picked a starting year during the pandemic. I mean, if you look at a starting year post-pandemic, then in fact you see strong growth in spending, faster than economic growth, which is why the deficits get worse. So it was pretty cheeky mathematics he's used, and it just doesn't reflect the underlying situation, Kieran. The reality of this budget is he's inherited an incredibly strong economy, incredibly strong budget, and yet he's got deficits getting worse over the next 3 years, and ultimately over the next 10 years, both gross debt and net debt getting worse than we saw in the March budget. So that's not what we need. That's not what Australians need. And frankly, I thought this budget, more than anything else, was a big advertisement for getting rid of the stage 3 tax cuts, which is what he really wants to do. There was no celebration of the stage 3 tax cuts. There was no encouragement of Australians to get out there and have a real crack over the next couple of years because they're going to keep 70 cents in the dollar across the broad sweep of income brackets. It's as though those tax cuts are not going to happen, and perhaps that's exactly what is in.
On the housing accord that he announced with the construction industry and superannuation funds and government, he says it's going to build a million properties from 2024, I think from memory, reading through the budget. Is it a constructive way to utilise the billions under management by the super funds?
Well, first of all,
to get it into infrastructure?
I have no idea how he's planning to do that. There's very little detail on how that's going to happen. And so we'd want to see the detail. And it's next to nothing. At this point, it's a target without a plan, and targets without a plan really are meaningless until we see more detail. The broader principle of superannuation, look, at the end of the day, superannuation is the money of Australians, not the money of the government, and they should be able to choose where they put it. And they should be able to build up a nest egg over the course of their life that's going to serve them well when they get older and retire. I mean, that's the whole purpose of it. It's not there for governments to be used. Now, I don't know what he's proposing. We'll await any details, but right now it looks to me like a target without a plan.
On the issue, though, of getting affordable housing near to where the jobs are, that sounds like a worthwhile goal.
Oh, sure. I mean, we know we need more housing in the coming years. That's absolutely right. We need housing that people can buy, and we want to get people into homes, and particularly first home buyers into homes. I mean, all of these things are incredibly important. But if you're going to actually achieve an outcome, you've got to do more than have a target without a plan, Kieran. You've actually got to have a plan, and there's no sign of a plan in this budget. More generally, I'd have to say, they've missed an opportunity to have a clear and comprehensive plan that deals with the challenges Australians are facing. That's not what this budget is. It's what Australians need, but it's not what it is, and that's why it's so disappointing.
The Treasurer says that this conversation he wants the nation to have needs to look at tax. It needs to be part of the conversation. Do you accept that any genuine discussion on the way that the budget is at the moment in terms of the structural deficit, that it does need to involve tax in one way or another?
Well, you know, one of the points that the Treasurer made in his speech, in the final section of his speech, is that they were choosing to spend more. He said he'd chosen, and they had chosen, to spend more on a number of occasions through the last part of his speech. Now, it's true, spending more is a choice. If they're getting over $140 billion of extra tax revenue, they can choose to spend the majority of it in ways that are not observable and certainly not going to be felt by a typical Australian family between now and Christmas. But that is their choice. Our choice as an opposition, and the view we've taken on this all along, is that we want to make sure that economic growth is stronger than spending growth, and that facilitates us passing through tax cuts to Australians, taking away bracket creep. We're seeing a lot of that, rising tax rates in the next couple of years for Australians, taking that away and giving Australians more of the money they earn, making sure that they keep it in their pockets, and making sure that they have a strong incentive to invest, to have a real crack, to take risks and keep 70 cents in the dollar.
Shadow Treasurer Angus Taylor, appreciate your time. Thanks.
Good on you, Kieran.